Hi everyone, and welcome to a CMG Tech Bite video. My name is Kevin Jocelyn, and I am a Senior Reservoir Simulation Engineer, and the subject of this video will be importing hydraulic fractures from a third party. This is an overview of the unconventional workflows with CMG. We have two main pathways. The upper pathway, highlighted in purple, would be for modeling the fractures, assuming that they are present at the start. So we're only modeling the production period. And the lower pathway, highlighted in green, would be to model both the fracture creation and the production. We're going to be in the upper pathway. And within the upper pathway, we have three techniques. We have CMG's planar fractures, complex fractures, and then third-party import. And this is going to be the topic of this video. For importing a fracture from a third-party software, we have three methods or three file types that are available. There's the CMGFRAC file, the CSV file, and then the FRAC file. In the CMGFRAC file, this is a newer and recommended approach, and in it we can import fractures from multiple wells into a single file. We can also have user interface options within Builder for controlling the import, so any sort of filtering that we need to do upon importing. And this is available in the 2020 version and newer. One limitation is that it's only supported by certain third-party softwares. Right now can export to CMGFRAC. The next format is going to be the CSV file. With a CSV file, we can import either an individual stage or multiple stages of a single well. We can still have multiple wells. It would just take multiple imports. So each well could only have its own import. Any sort of filtering or manipulation that we need to make to the CSV files upon importing will have to be done within the CSV files themselves. This is the older method, but more third parties support it currently. And finally, we have something called a .frac file. A .frac file allows for the bulk import of fractures. We can import multiple CSV files from multiple wells at a time. And any sort of import options can be applied within a frac file instead of applying to individual CSV files. So this is useful when we need to make multiple changes to multiple CSV files. Rather than editing the CSV files individually, we can do it globally. For importing fracture data from a CMGFRAC format, it'll be done through Builder and through the fracture window, which I'll be showing a demo a little bit later in this video. Any sort of filtering options, such as conductivity cutoff, half-length cutoffs that we want to apply to our imported fractures will be done through a user interface. Currently, Gopher is the only program that will support the .CMGFRAC format. For importing a .CSV, these are the programs that support this format. So we have Gopher, FRAC Pro, StimPro, StimPlan, FRAC Predictor, and MFRAC. And the CSV file is just a text file where the data is separated by commas. And we'll have a header here of the information, followed by the measured depth and horizontal and vertical offset of the fracture relative to the perforation, and then the conductivity. So this will be files that will be generated by the third-party software. The final format is the .frac file format. This is just a text-based format, a CMG format. And within this .frac file format, we can make any edits that we want to import our CSVs. So the first thing that we would identify is the CSV path, so where the CSVs are saved, and then any sort of extra overriding keywords that we want to include. In the example on the screen, we're using a conductivity cutoff that we want to apply to these different CSV files, and we can have it for multiple wells. When we import from a third party, one of the things that we want to do is to achieve or to preserve the fracture conductivity distribution that was calculated by that third-party fracturing software. So on the screen here, I have two examples of a fracture. It's a gun barrel view, so the well is going into the page. And what we can see on the left is we have a linear gradient conductivity here. So this might be something that was generated with CMG's planar fracs, because we can see it's just a correlation that's controlling the permeability or conductivity distribution within the fracture. And then on the right, we have a fracture from a third party, and it's using what we call structured block groups, where the permeability, it can be seemingly random, but basically it'll be coming from that third party where the conductivity is associated with a relative distance to our perforation point. So I'll start by just opening a file in Builder, and in this file I have a single horizontal well that has yet to have fractures. So just a simple horizontal well. I'll go to the wells and recurrent section and click on hydraulic fracturing. And the first one I'm going to do is a CMGFRAC file. So when I come to the hydraulic fracturing window, we can see here there's a button for import fracture data, and just below it tells you the types of file types that can be imported through this button. And the first one listed there is CMGFRAC or .CMGFRAC. So I'm going to click on import fracture data, and I'm just going to select a CMGFRAC file here. So the CMGFRAC file would be an exported file from a program like Gopher, and we can bring that directly into Builder. The first page when I import is where we will map the wells from the CMGFRAC file to the existing data set. So I'm going to click on the button Map Wells and say yes. And because I have the well names the same, it was automatically able to map them. But if a different well name was used in Gopher than what we have in Builder, then we can map them manually to make sure that they're associated with the correct wells. We have some filtering options here. The first one is absolute conductivity cutoff. By default, that's going to be 1% of the maximum permeability. So the anything lower than 1% of the maximum calculated permeability from the CMGFRAC file will not be imported. And so this would be if we have really long fracs, because maybe in the third-party software, it's calculated these really long fracs, but the conductivity or permeability at those far distances is actually really low and not really contributing to the flow. So we can put a conductivity cutoff. If we want to overwrite the default, we could enter a value. Maybe we want to import everything, and we could put a really small cutoff, such as 1e-6, and that will import everything. We could also have a half-length cutoff. I'm going to leave that as blank. And sometimes maybe we've only modeled one stage, and we want to use that stage in multiple locations along our well. So we could use the repeat option here if we wanted to repeat the fracture. I don't have that for this. I have actually 10 fractures for the full length of the well, so I'm not going to use that option. Those are the main options that most people will use, but we also have an option in the bottom left here to customize. So when I click on that, we have advanced options here for importing. I'll just highlight a few of them. One of them is going to be use SVG format. So this option will preserve the conductivity distribution. And by default, it's checked. If I uncheck that, it's not going to preserve the conductivity distribution, and instead trying to fit a linear gradient from the perf point to the fracture tip. So instead, it's more like preserving the size of the fracture as opposed to the conductivity distribution. We could include longitudinal fractures if they exist in our CMGFRAC file. And then we could change what kind of cutoff option we want to use. So we could use an absolute conductivity cutoff, we could use an absolute perm cutoff, or we could use a cutoff percentage. There are also some further advanced options, such as the number of refinements and fracture orientation and layers up and down. So I'll say OK, and then once I say OK, we'll now see I actually have all 10 fracs have been imported. So I'm just going to move this window off to the right and just going to go to the plane where my well is. And here you can see I have 10 fractures, each different size. We're looking at the aerial view here. And if I close this and just go to the side view and change the property to be permeability, I can see the permeability distribution of the imported hydraulic fracture. So I'm going to repeat those the same procedure but using the different file format, and I hope to achieve the exact same fracture. So just move this to the side, and we'll start by opening another model here without fractures. And in this model, again, I have a single horizontal well, and I'm just going to click on hydraulic fracturing. And this time I'm going to import the CSV format. So I'll click on, to import a CSV format, it has to be done on a per well basis. So when I open the hydraulic fractured wells window, this import fracture is a global import. So it can be from multiple wells at the same time. And that's why we could do the CMGFRAC file. But for a CSV file, it needs to be on the individual well. So I only have one well, but to access the import options for an individual well, I click on the date associated with that well, and then I can click on import fracture data. Now, before I do that, I need to make a quick edit actually to the exported CSV file. So I have a CSV file here. It's an example CSV file. And it can be opened in Excel, or it could also be opened in any text editor. So this would be a file that's coming maybe from MFRAC or Gopher. Now, the CMGFRAC files that we imported first, they cannot be edited with a text file. The editing, any sort of filtering is done through the user interface in Builder. For the CSV files, because they're text-based, we need to do the editing prior to import. And one of the things I want to add is going to be the SVG format keyword. So up at the very top, which is where I have my headers, I'm just going to add an SVG underscore format. And what I'll do is just save this, and I'll call it SVG to know that I've made a change. And now when I go back to Builder, so now I'm in Builder and I click on import fracture data, should have two CSV files that I can actually import. The original, so this would be one coming directly from the other software, or my edited one where I've added in that SVG format keyword. So I'll select my edited one and I'll click on open. And I'll say, okay, we can see I have the same, or I have 10 fracs again, and it should be the same. This CSV file is actually the equivalent of the CMGFRAC file that we imported. And I'll just go to, again, the side view. And we can see the permeability distribution. So for the last file format, I'm going to use a .frac file. So a .frac file, I'm just going to open up one that I've actually already created. And so this would have to be created by the user in text. So this is a sample one that I've created ahead of time. And we can see here that it's a pretty simple file format with just a few inputs. So the first input in a .frac file would just be the units. So I've identified the units here as being SI. We would then have a header here for a stage definition, and then headers for what could be basically a table. So the first column is going to be the well name. The second column will be the date. The third column will be CSV path. So this is important, where the CSV is saved. And then any other columns would be extra keywords that we want to add. In this one, I'm going to use that same SVG format keyword. So the next line, I've typed in here the well name, so well 1, the date, the path. So if I go to Launcher here, I've actually created a folder here called CSV, and inside that CSV, I have my original CSV file coming from the third party. So if you had multiple CSVs, which is quite often the case, a lot of the times we might have, say, 20 CSV files. So we can, say for like 20 stages, we can input or put all 20 CSV files into one folder location. So if I go back to the FRAC file, so I'm referencing that folder. If it's within multiple folder locations, you just have to put the file complete path here. And then true is a reference to this SVG format. So because I'm importing the unedited CSV, that original .csv file, I want to apply this SVG format. And this is where it comes in handy if I have multiple, because then I'm taking that SVG format and actually applying it to multiple files, but just with a single line here. So let's go to open up our file again, where we only had that single well without fracs. And I'm just going to go to hydraulic fracturing, and I'm going to select, so on the main page again, import fracture data, and you can see here .frac is one of the supported formats. So I'll select import fracture data. I select my file .frac, and I'll select open. And again, I have 10 fracs, and it should have the same permeability distribution. So what happens if we didn't include that SVG format? So we saw that it was a checkbox when we used CMGFRAC. We put it into the CSV file, or we put it into the .frac file when referencing a CSV file. So here I have a sample case where I've already gone ahead and imported where I don't include the SVG format keyword. I'll just go to that same fracture that we were looking at with the previous cases. And we can see here it's not preserving the distribution of conductivity, and instead it's preserving the size, and instead it's sort of matching the conductivity to a linear function. So that's why we want to use that SVG format. So let's see how the data set has changed. So I'll open up just one of my files here where I've actually already imported the fractures into CMG's text editor, or cedit. And I'm just going to highlight a few keywords that have been added through this import. First are known as PDD. So the PDD data is basically the original data coming from the either the CMGFRAC or the CSV files. It's basically a series of triplets of vertical offset, horizontal offset, and then the conductivity. And regardless of what conductivity cutoff we use, it'll be the original data. So if we want to change that later, we can, if we increase the size of our half length. So that's the conductivity distribution isn't saved in the PDD data. We have a series of templates. Each fracture that gets created will have its own template, and that's because each template will be a different size. But if you're used to using CMG's fracture templates, you'll notice that the templates don't have a permeability reference, and that's because we want to use that PDD data. So I'll just scroll down. We have the planar frac keyword, which takes the template and applies it to a specific location, and that's going to be based on the measure depth coming from the CMGFRAC file or the CSV file. We also have a creation here of an SBG. This is an important keyword, SBG, as that will create a structure block group, which allows us to use an array or basically reference that PDD data. I'll scroll down to the perm keyword, where we actually see the SBG reference here, and then the PDD data referenced as well. So that's how the PDD data will get referenced to the specific fracture structured block group. I went ahead and ran these files, and what we're looking at here, they were run on a constant bottom hole pressure, and we're looking at, this is a dry gas well. We're looking at the gas rate, and even though I use 3 different formats, it's still the same data, and we can see we have the same gas rate in all 3 cases. So that's how we can import from a third party. We showed how to import CMGFRAC, CSV, and then a .frac file to import multiple CSVs at once. Thank you very much for your attention, and hope to see you again soon.